Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Mondays with Mad. And we are here today. We're going to be talking about law enforcement and crime in New Mexico. So I want to just talk to you, just give you a little about what happened this past week and in the last few weeks. We have been seeing this uprising in our youth, and they are worried about guns in the schools and the fact that they are the ones on the front lines in this battle against guns or for gun control. I do want to point out to everyone that I am a veteran and I do have guns, and I am a Second Amendment supporter. But I do believe that the time has come that we do need to begin to have, to actually have real discussion on what is going on in our country. And so I am very happy to begin to have that conversation between both sides. And that is something that we will work on as we move forward. Again, as for law enforcement, I am a veteran of the Coast Guard, and as a Coast Guard person, I was military police in the Coast Guard. We called it Shore Patrol, and as such, I went through the police academy. I went through law enforcement, maritime law enforcement training, and I carried a gun. I drove a police car. I was an officer. I was a police officer, and being such, I think that I have this unique perspective on law enforcement and crime that I will be bringing to Congress with me when I win this race and I go to Congress for all of you and for New Mexico. And so this is where I've come up with these ideas or these, my certain perspective, and this is what I want to share with you today. So before we go into some of these ideas, I want to give you just a sliver of what's going on in New Mexico, just so that you can just get kind of grounded in what's happening. So we are, as most of you know, we are always at the top of all the worst lists, and we are at the bottom of all the best lists. And we tend to share that with the state of Alaska. And these things we rotate between being number one or number two between us and Alaska, and always on the worst. So if you look at some of these lists, we are at the 1 and 2 trading with Alaska as the worst for violent crime, the worst for nonviolent crime of all the states. We are the worst for unemployment. Opposite of us on these lists are 2 states that are right up there at the top of all the good lists, and that's Maine and New Hampshire. And what they have that we aren't having, they're at the top of the list for job creation and education, and at the bottom of the list for violent and nonviolent crime and unemployment. So, and here we are at the bottom of those job creation and education lists. So what we can see is that these 2 things are connected. They're interconnected. And what we see then, what's happening is that crime keeps businesses from coming to New Mexico. It also keeps our current businesses from growing because of this high level of crime. And this hurts our schools. And the reason this hurts our schools is because the tax base that we should be getting, which we talked about last week, the tax base is down. And this is affecting our education. So it's this, just everything is so interconnected. And that's why each time we talk, so many of these things we have to discuss together, or fix one to fix another. Everything is in this way. So one of the other things that we're number 1 in, overdoses, when we look at prison and our prison population, when these people come out of prison and from all of those crimes that I was just talking about, our recidivism rate here in our state is upwards of 60%. And you can actually find those statistics. You can play with statistics in the criminal justice system by going to the Bureau of Justice Statistics. That's at www.bjs.gov. census.gov and just kind of play around with that. And then you can see more on various statistics. This is the way you want to play with that. So when we're looking at that recidivism rate, our very next neighbor, just go across the border through Las Cruces into Texas. Texas recidivism rate is only 22%. So what's different between what's going on with us and what's going on with Texas? And really the thing that's happening there is that they have programs to retrain the people that have been incarcerated. And this is something that we are really woefully lacking in. So if we look at our prisons, we pay for our prisons. This is something we do. We fund our prisons. We fund about $600 million a year on prisons. If we look at who's in prison, let's just think about what our prison population is. Our male population, 65% of the male population in prison is there because of violent crimes. 35% of that population is there for nonviolent crimes. And what we're talking about is property crime, drug abuse, overdoses, drug addiction. And then within this 35%, we have the 6%, which is mentally ill. And we'll get back to mentally ill in a few minutes. Now, when we look at our female prison population, over 60% of our female population in prison is nonviolent criminals. And so primarily what we're talking about is marijuana possession and drug addiction. So what are the causes? Why are we seeing these people in our prisons here in New Mexico? And really what we're looking at is people who come from economically depressed communities. We're talking about people that have a loss of hope and really despair. We're seeing a lot of these problems, particularly the drug problems, beginning with kids who are 12, 13, 14 years old, and they're coming from homes that are also experiencing the same despair in the same communities. And these kids have no hope because their parents have no hope and their communities have no hope. So one of the things that we're seeing in this is that we as a state have cut money from education. So education isn't fun anymore. What happens to band and physical education and sports and vocational education? And we need to begin to put some of that money back into these programs to help to bring back that idea that there is a positive future, that school is fun, and our future, the future of these kids, is also going to be fun. Now, so that's our children. Now, what's happening over for women, this that I was just discussing a minute ago, the women, a large cause, a large reason for these women being incarcerated in these programs, these women are primarily sexually abused. A large percentage of them are sexually abused. And what we see is that the intervention in these programs, we don't see intervention. Of the 80,000 cases, these are phone calls, 911 phone calls in 2016. Only a little over a half of those were ever prosecuted. So those women remain in those homes, and their children remain in those homes, and we don't see early intervention. And we need to see intervention in those situations and get these people out of these, these positions of despair. And we need to change that. So one of the things that we also, and one of the questions that I've got a lot of questions from people asking about privately owned prisons. And that is an issue that we have here in New Mexico. We have a lot of, of prisons that are privately owned. And I am not in favor of privately owned prisons, but this is something that we have to deal with here in New Mexico. So you can't just go and close all these prisons, because that would put people out of business. That would put people, out of work, not out of business, but the workers. And it would put people out on the streets, and we have nowhere else to house these people. So what we need to do is to stop the growth of the inmates that we're seeing. So private prisons have asked for an increase in funding. And let me tell you why they've done that. So the idea is that over the next 10 years, they expect to grow up to 18% in the male population, inmate population, and up to 25% in the female inmate population. That's something that we need to stem. And in order to do that, what we have to do is focus on the nonviolent criminals. So what we're looking at is that 35% of men, we're looking at that 60% of women, and to see if there's something else that we can do with that. So part of this, again, the second part of this, looking at those two groups of people, the next group of people that we have to find an alternative for is the mentally ill. So what's happened in the mentally ill is that mental health has taken a hit from Governor Martinez over this whole past 8 years. And we know that that programs were cut, and what happens is that law enforcement and prisons have had to take up that burden in handling our mentally ill, but they are not equipped in order to handle that. So we can see that Governor Martinez put out 14 of 15 mental health businesses went out of business. And what the claim is that this was because they were abusing Medicaid costs. But over these past 8 years, that didn't pan out. Only one business was fined, and it wasn't fined very heavily. So, but those businesses are gone to us. It's gone. So when we look at who did take over that role in our state, as far as there were 3 Arizona companies that came in and took over that role, which they were not successful in doing. But those 3 companies were all donors to Governor Martinez's PAC. So this is cronyism at its worst. So what we need to do is see the growth, or find a way to bring back these programs into the state of New Mexico. So if we're looking at then some of the things that we need to do, some of the positives that we can come out of this, we need to see a growth and support of nonprofit organizations that are working to help our prison population and to help them come out of prison without recidivism. So one of these organizations that I've been looking at and that I would like to see across New Mexico is Fathers Building Futures. And you can look them up online. It's just fathersbuildingfutures.com. And they work very, very much in Albuquerque. And what they do is they go in and they identify prisoners who are fathers, that these are prisoners that are going to reach the end of their time in prison. And what they do is they train them in various jobs. So they're preparing them for these jobs. They help to get them jobs. They are giving them a secure future. And then they are counseling them. And what Fathers Building Futures has seen is a 75% drop in the recidivism of these men that they have identified and have been working with. And I would like to see programs like that receiving federal monies and state monies and support, so that we can start helping our prison population, so that they aren't unprepared when they get out of prison. We also need to see our drug courts utilized as best as possible. And so Doña Ana has a drug court that what happens is that when these people go to jail and they're going to go to prison because of these nonviolent drug crimes, they, instead of going through the normal court system, they're going to the drug courts. And then what they do is get sent into drug treatment and into counseling instead of to prison. And what Doña Ana has seen is an 86% success rate with these people who are going through these other programs. And we also have a similar program that is available for veterans, and these are the veterans courts. And again, when you're looking at veterans, you're looking at people with specific problems that often have to do with PTSD. And so a veterans court is going to take these people, these men and women who are veterans who have PTSD, and they're going to look at them differently. They're going to look at them in lines with what has happened to them and what is causing their issues, and help them go into these alternative programs where they get counseling and treatment, and then training so that they can, again, re-enter the regular mainstream society and do so successfully. So I have two other questions actually that I had that I wanted to answer here. Again, these are questions that a lot of people had asked, but I liked that these two that I wanted to discuss today. Grayson Lovington asked me, where do we get the money for drug treatment centers? And she's referring to the fact that, you know, all these things are gone from here now. So this is something that when we look at the lack of these centers, we can actually put something into place that 44 other states are already doing. So there's already something out here that we in New Mexico can easily replicate. So what's happening, and I will work with our new governor, whoever that person is, in order to make sure that these things take place. So what will happen with this program is that the industry itself, the healthcare, the mental health industry, taxes itself 6%, so that what its earnings are taxed by 6%, and then that money goes into this program. The federal government then matches that money 2 to 1. And it is estimated that there would be about $315 million coming into this program for the mental health industry itself in order to take care of these nonviolent criminals that need mental health care. This isn't a new idea. Our legislature here in New Mexico actually passed this legislation, and Governor Martinez said that it's a new tax and we can't tax our population. But in this case, this is a tax that the industry itself is willing to tax themselves in order to put this money into our state. And I think that this is an opportunity that we should not let our state pass by. Then we have another question. This one is from Juan in Socorro. He says, my cousin is an addict. What do we do about the opioid epidemic? Thank you, Juan, for this question. So I see that we have a two-pronged approach to the opioid epidemic. And one part of that is, in fact, law enforcement, because we have to support our law enforcement officers. You know, we can't just do this through education and through mental health care and through prisons. We need to support and work with our law enforcement agencies. So what we need to do is to target our drug dealers. So when we're looking at Socorro, we are a high-intensity drug trafficking area. So is Las Cruces. So, I mean, right up the middle of our state, along the bottom of our state, we have this high drug trafficking that's going on. And what we're seeing is the opioid epidemic has just shot out of control. And what we need to do is to use that program to drive as many federal dollars into our state in order to help our officers target dealers and manufacturers. And in targeting the dealers and manufacturers, they also need to have the staff. In order to get the money from the federal government, they also have to include the staff. So I would like to see grants and funding come from the federal government to our sheriffs and police departments in order to help have staff that can focus specifically on drug trafficking and drug manufacture. The second prong to this approach is the treatment centers that we talked a little bit about a few minutes ago. And here's the problem with what we do here in New Mexico. We put these people, when they are convicted, we put them into treatment programs for 2 months. 2 months. The industry itself says that it takes 2 years. 2 years. So look at the difference that we're talking about. So we need state funding. We need state funding. We need nonprofit dollars, and we need federal monies all coming together, federal grants. And there are different organizations that have these monies. There are different federal programs, and we can begin to identify these things. But a key to this is that the state has to be doing it too. The state has to initiate it in order to bring in the nonprofit and the federal monies. And so this is why we have to have the right people in both positions. This is why I am uniquely positioned to be able to, as your representative, come back in with my law enforcement background and talk to the state and help to bring these programs together. There's an estimate, there's about $350 million that would almost immediately be able to be used in our state if we combine these multiple sources. And this is how the program would be for these people. Year one, and this is, again, it comes right out of the industry. Year one is treatment, and this is the treatment phase. And this would switch over to job training during that first year. And then the second year is internships, job internships, and the continued training, and help towards the end of that. There would be help getting jobs. And once they get through the program, because again, reminding people that these are non-violent offenders, they've gone through a 2-year program, wiping the record clean so that they can get jobs, because convictions often keep them from qualifying for so many jobs. And so we need to see that change. It's key in all of this, as we're talking about law enforcement and crime in the state of New Mexico, is that we underfund our programs. We underfund treatment centers. We underfund our courts. We underfund our law enforcement. The one thing we fully fund are prisons. And we need to change this paradigm. We have to switch the way we think about it and talk a little bit more about fixing the underlying programs and fixing the programs that utilizing the programs that we do have in order to make a change and help all of New Mexicans, so that we are not dealing with the crime and the drug addiction problems that we have now, and switch our position on the worst lists and get onto those best lists. So I thank you for coming again today, and I will see you again next week. And please go ahead and send in questions. And I don't have in front of me the topic for next week. I'll get that posted up there as quickly as we can so that we can continue getting these wonderful questions that are helping me to come up with, with these plans, and let you know where I stand on these new ideas. So thank you again, and I will talk to you next week.